You are listening to WCAT Radio, your station for quality Catholic programming. Your selected program will begin right after a word from our sponsor, GroupM7.com, a web design and hosting company. Log on to GroupM7.com today and let them know that WCAT Radio sent you.
You know, my finest childhood memories was the Saturday morning movies for about 4 bits each. My brother and I could split a Coke and a big box of popcorn and watch movies about Tarzan, Jane, and their Amazon River adventures. Well, maybe that's where Jeff Bezos took his name. His Amazon.com is now the largest online retailer in the world. I'm Michael Mahfood with Group M7, the oldest and largest website design firm in East Texas. And here's my point, and as usual, it's a good one. If your website is modern and up-to-date, mobile and search engine friendly, it matters not whether you sell a product or provide information about your goods and services, your sales justifiably will increase just like theirs. The world uses the internet. We can improve your website and your email. Look at our giant portfolio at GroupM7.com. Since 1995, there's only one web and there's only one group, and it's us. It's Group M7.
You're listening to WCAT Radio, your home for authentic Catholic programming.
Welcome to The Open Door, a show based on the words in Revelation, "I have left an open door before you, which no one can close." This is WCAT Radio's longest-running show, which opened the door to the radio station in October 2016. It's currently offered by Jim Hanink, Mario Ramos-Reyes and friends, and remains open to the love of God in its call to build a culture of life and a just social order through the panel's discussion of the Catholic social teaching principles of solidarity, subsidiarity, and economic democracy. The Open Door also explores nonviolence, distributism, and communitarianism. So join us at the Open Door, where you too can be part of the conversation.
Welcome to the Open Door. Jim Hanink here with panelists Mario Ramos-Reyes and Christopher Zehnder. Today on the Open Door, we bring center stage someone who, from our start, has been hovering in the wings. Dr. Sebastian Mahfood, OP, will be our extraordinary extra special guest. He is the guiding spirit of En Route Books and Media. He is also vice president at Holy Apostles Seminary and College in Cromwell, Connecticut. We know him best as our good friend Sebastian. Let's begin with prayer. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful and enkindle in them the fire of your love. Send forth your Spirit, and they shall be created, and you shall renew the face of the earth. Let us pray. O God, who has taught the hearts of the faithful by the light of the Holy Spirit, grant that by the gift of the same Spirit, we may be always truly wise and ever rejoice in his consolation. Through Christ our Lord. Amen. Sebastian, could you start by telling us a bit about your background? Where were you raised?
I was born and raised in Tyler, Texas, in the belt buckle of the Southern Baptist Bible Belt. Our Catholic diocese there, I think there's only 3% of the entire diocese that's Catholic. So those of us who were Catholic growing up in East Texas were a very tight-knit group. So I went to St. Gregory Cathedral School for my elementary school years. For kindergarten, mostly. It's the best 4 years of my life. And right now I've been asked to return. Well, it was a couple of years ago, but I'm still in the position as the board chair for the advisory board for the cathedral school. So that's just been a delight, reconnecting with my roots, with the school that loved me first. So yeah, my heart is still there. My heart is is in the place where I lived and for all the formative years of my life. And I've been away for about half my life now. I moved to St. Louis in 1997, so I've been here 24 years. But I'm not geographically bound. You know, I work in Connecticut for the full past decade, and I bounce all over the country doing one thing or another. But when I want to go somewhere and relax, I go to Texas.
Gosh, I believe you. I believe you.
Incidentally, I've raised my children to understand that they are Texan expatriates, and that one day they will return to the promised land.
Now, before we go ahead, let's linger a bit in the promised land. Has East Texas faced any problems?
Well, you know, we had a bit of a power outage earlier this spring, but we got through it. My entire family rallied, and you're going to see a cat every now and then walk in front of my screen until it gets bored being up here. My apologies for that. You were talking about the spirit earlier, and the spirit moves the cat as the spirit will. So what kind of problems are you thinking about?
Well, I'm thinking that in the popular imagination, East Texas with the Deep South and seen as sharing in some of the unhappy legacy of the Deep South. And we're talking rednecks here. Is there anything you want to say about that, Sebastian, before we move forward?
Well, first off, I am a redneck. You know, when I
turn around.
right. When I go down to Texas, it takes me about 3 or 4 days to get my accent back, but it do come. So I had to go through major accent reduction therapy when I was in a Peace Corps volunteer in North Africa, because there's certain North African words you just cannot say with an East Texan twang. So by the time I returned to Texas, my family thought that I had the accent. And I said, oh. So I've cultivated a crisp, clear, Midwestern accent.
Well, that's good. That's a good choice.
Right. But in terms of the Deep South, this past summer in 2020, when all of the unrest was occurring because of the George Floyd incident and what was happening in the nation as the country tried to recalibrate a little bit, in fact, jettison that history. My high school was called Robert E. Lee High School, just to give you a sense of where I was educated. And they changed the name of the high school, the Tyler Independent School District Board, this past summer, to be Tyler Legacy, or Legacy High, which is interesting. You know, it still has the word Lee in it, legacy. But it's a recalibration of Tyler itself to respond to this national mood. So that was probably the most striking thing about Tyler that I've experienced in the past year. The willingness to change the name of a high school that's been named, as far as I know, Robert E. Lee for as long as Tyler's been around with that high school. So.
Mm-hmm. Mario, you want to lead us forward?
Yes. What is your educational background? Are you a philosopher, administrator, historian?
Yes.
All of the above.
Well, I told you that my very first school was St. Gregory Cathedral School. And so, you know, where they say that most of the important things you learned in life, you learned in kindergarten. Well, I kept having to relearn that lesson, let me tell you. By the time I got out of the elementary school, I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be a historian. I wanted to teach history. it was a dream of my father's that he embedded within me from a very early age. He told me one thing. He said, "What are you going to be when you grow up?" And I remember telling maybe 1,000 people over the course of my youth, I want to be president of the United States, because that's what he wanted me to be. And I said, Dad, what if I'm not president? He said, it doesn't matter. If you aim for president of the United States, you'll land on something good. Aim for a way to protect and to cultivate a community, a great or broad society of communities. And anything you do will be good, because whatever organization or whatever institution in which I end up, there's certain kinds of institutions you don't want to be institutionalized in. But I would have the sense of a statesman rather than, perhaps a partisan politician. So after graduation from Robert E. Lee, I went to the University of Texas at Arlington. I stayed there a couple of years and finished my undergraduate degree. I got my master's, and it was a double major, was history. And I had an encounter my junior year with a literature professor named Simone Turbeville. And she taught me a class on Dante's Divine Comedy. And I was hooked. I double majored, took 6 English classes my senior year, just so I could pick up the credits, and ended up pursuing my master's degree in comparative literature. It wasn't like history was behind me or anything, but the comparative literature included all of the history. So it seemed like something to do. And at the age of 22, I graduated with my MA and jumped right into the United States Peace Corps. Spent 2 years in North Africa. I learned Arabic and French, and got to explore all the history of ancient Rome and the breadbasket of the Roman Empire, as it was called. And when I returned to this country in '96, I realized I wanted to teach. I wanted to teach forever. I had spent 2 years in North Africa teaching at a university. I was an associate professor there. At age 22, they hired me as an associate professor. Or at least they didn't know what they were getting. The Peace Corps is like a box of chocolates. So when I returned, I realized I needed a PhD. So I went to St. Louis University. I finished a PhD in post-colonial literature, in an expansion of comparative literature to a degree. There's differences. And then when I finished my doctorate, my dissertation on radical eschatologies, how African novelists were using Christian eschatologies, Abrahamic eschatologies, to pursue a materialist social vision. So it was about Marxism. I thought to myself after I finished writing that paper, there's more to study in theology that I don't know. So I was going to pursue a master's in theology, completely online from Holy Apostles College and Seminary. And I was working at a seminary at the time, at Kinder Glennon Seminary. And one of the faculty members there said, if you're going to study Catholic theology, you might as well start where our seminarians start, with with philosophy, with scholastic philosophy, with the perennial philosophy of Aristotle and St. Thomas. And Holy Apostles had an online program in just that area. So I have an MA in philosophy, I have an MA in theology, and I picked up a Master of Educational Technology at Webster University in the meantime, just because. And I got halfway through an MBA program before I realized that what the program wanted to teach me was how to be a good employee. And I realized, it's not teaching me anything about how to be a good employer. I dropped the program and opened En route Books and Media, and here I am.
Gosh, that's quite a story. I believe most of it.
Well, the beginning of Singing in the Rain, where the main character is talking about everything in dignity, and you get this glorified, rosy picture of his whole life, and then you actually see the vaudeville stuff that he had to do to get to where he was. That's there's a lot of that in the background too. I was a professional wrestler just to pay my way through college. That's another story, which departs from the kinds of questions you asked. But I broke chairs over people's heads for a year. I mean, good fun. The world of wrestling is a world of, as Roland Barthes says, a world of where good is pitted against evil. And good men always win by their own virtues and merits, and bad men always win by cheating. So the real audience is always in the crowd, not in the ring. And that's the real education. It's working with others. It's the kinds of engagements that books can't teach. I've learned that over the course of my years.
All right, that's a whole lot of lessons. Christopher.
Yeah, in all those years of your accomplishments, did you take any time to have a family? If you did, maybe you can introduce it to us.
Sure. I'll tell you first about the family that took time to have me. My grandfather and my grandmother, Milo and Mary Rose, moved to East Texas in 1957. And my father was about 10 years old at the time. His name's Philip Mahfood. And anticipating the question, I brought a photo of him. Let's see if you can see it with my filter. There it is. So this is him. He was a radio talk show host in East Texas, and was on every day on the Tyler radio station, KTBB, for a number of years. And one of the things that he liked to do was engage interesting people. And I thought to myself, that would be an interesting thing to do one day, to have a radio show or a radio program and begin engaging interesting people, to let their stories be known. And that marked me my whole life. And I'll talk a little bit about that when we get into En Route Books and Media and WCAT Radio. Philip Mahfood died in 2004. My mother, Suzanne, is remarried to Paul. Her name is Suzanne Balden. And it was an interesting mix because my father's Lebanese and his parents were Lebanese and their parents were Lebanese. We come from a long line of Phoenicians. And my mother's family were East Texan. They were daughters of the Revolution, daughters of the Second War for American Independence, who have popularly known, and rather crassly, I think, as the American Civil War. She's daughter of the Texas Revolution. I mean, really, her family got into every single major battle against the people they were living with anytime one of those battles presented themselves. Her family came from Stephen F. Austin's trek of 300 families down from Tennessee. So her family had been there a while. They were well established. They had women's socials. They had an entire matriarchal structure that ran from East Texas all the way to Georgia. And my father entered that family as sort of the odd man out. They didn't quite know what to do with him. But importantly, my mother entered my father's family as the odd woman out. And so I grew up with a sense that I was living in two worlds, that I was living in one world of grape leaves and kibbe, and I was living in the other world of collard greens and squash. And there goes another cat.
Hey, there's an earthquake.
Well, you have to understand, I'm surrounded by 4 cats in this house. And so what I do for my meetings to avoid being interrupted is I bring cat money. Now, this is a commercial for Frisky's Party Mix. I will charge them later for that plug. So that was the dynamic in which I grew up. I grew up a Catholic in a heavily Southern Baptist area. I grew up in if the words liminality and hybridity could be applied to anybody, it would be applied to the life I lived as an East Texan growing up, the grandson of Milo and Mary Rose Mahfood, and the grandson of Louise Flory, who was the bedrock of the East Texan family on my mother's side for 89 years. My aunt and uncle still live in East Texas. That's Michael and Suzanne Mahfood. And I try to get down there every 3 months. And I spend the whole weekend at their house. We go out, we do a lot of things, the fun things. It's the place where I go rest and relax. all of my cousins come over. They had 5 children, and their children had 16 kids collectively. So it's a real gathering ground for all things Mahfoodian. And I was rather saddened by the fact that when COVID hit, I couldn't go down and visit for 15 months. But they just celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary, and I got to go down there and celebrate that with them. More immediately, the reason why I'm in St. Louis is I lost a bet. So I married Stephanie Lynn Olson, who was a Peace Corps volunteer with me in North Africa. She was stationed 2 hours north in the capital city of Tunis. I was in the city of Kairouan. And we became very good friends when we were in Africa. And just before we left, we said, hey, let's see each other again in the United States. And then when we saw each other again in the United States, I said, hey, this would be a good thing to make permanent. But we had a problem. I lived in Texas and she lived in St. Louis. And so we made a bet. Whoever had the better position in 1 year would keep the city. Well, a year later, I was adjuncting at Texas Christian University. I was working at the Dallas County Auditor's Office as an auditing clerk part-time. And she was in a graduate program and had a full-time job. So I packed up the few items I had and moved to North. And I was told after I got married by my great-grandmother, whom we called Mama, she was a tobacco-spitting, cane-wielding force to be reckoned with. And she called me over one day, waving her cane in the air, saying, Seba, you gone married yourself a Yankee. And then she spit in her can. That was the end of that discussion.
That's great.
We've had 2 children, Alexander and Eva. And Alexander's 16 years old and Eva is 12. So that's the family.
Very good. Now there's another origin story to be told. En route books and media. How did that come about and how is it fueled, as they say, fueled?
Well, En route books and media is a very interesting company. I founded it in 2014, so 7 years ago. In the past 7 years, I've published 191 Catholic books. I'm going to hit 200 by September. That's just inevitable. I've got so many people contacting me saying, hey, I've written a book. How do I go about working it? The model is first-time Catholic authors with an important message to share. A message that they feel just has to get out there, but that will not get out there under traditional publishing houses. And part of the reason why is that publishing houses tend to look for something called return on investment, which is something I've discovered is actually a very good thing to have. But over the past 7 years, publishing 191 books, I've somehow managed to sustain the company. Return on investment means that the kinds of authors that get published are people with broad social media outlets, ways to market books, not in the tens, but in the hundreds or in the thousands. I know one publishing house that requires its authors to commit to selling at least 3,500 copies of a book. And most Catholic authors, or most first-time authors, will sell maybe 100 copies of their book in their lifetime, 6 of which will be sold to their mother, who will buy it out of pity or pride. But the company didn't start out like that. The company started out in 2014. Father Douglas Mosey and I were at Holy Apostles, and we said, we need to find a way to strengthen the profile of the seminary within the Catholic community. And I said, a lot of Catholic schools have people who are well known. Take, for instance, Scott Hahn over at Franciscan. They've got publications. They go out and give talks. Well, at Holy Apostles in Cromwell, Connecticut, we have a dedicated core faculty of people who focused largely on teaching. And so how do we get them known? Well, we can publish things that they wrote, I said. We can encourage them to write things for publication. And then the question was, well, who's going to publish them? And I thought, I don't know. And then my dear friend Rhonda Chervin came up with the answer. She said, why don't we open a publishing house? And we'll publish all of the works from all of our faculty. And the first work we'll publish is a work by me and her on Catholic realism. And the idea came to her when the book that we had written, we sent it to our friend Father Fessio over at Ignatius. And Father Fessio said, well, it's not the kind of book that he would publish, but good luck. And so I said, Father Fessio, if I were to open a publishing house, what are two things that I should focus on? He said, quality and marketing. And I said, okay. And the marketing piece, within a couple of years, I figured a way to pursue that. It was with Rhonda Chervin and with Bob Olson, one of Rhonda's friends. We opened up something called WCAT Radio. And our very first show, we had one show host and one listener. And that listener was me. And the show was
You listened well. You listened well. You're a good listener.
The show was called The Open Door.
Ah.
And now you're over 200 episodes into it. So congratulations.
Wow. Now I want to interject here a counter example on marketing.
Okay.
Catholic Worker. Penny a copy. No advertising. Ever. Went up well over 100,000 copies. Penny a copy, but that put you on the tab if you didn't have the penny. How in the dickens did they do it? They didn't know anything about marketing. They still don't. Recently here in California, there was a Catholic Worker reunion, and they had a theme. You know, marketers like themes. The theme was still crazy after all these years. So how about marketing in that sense? Is there any hope for it?
I love the idea. We give away a lot, in terms of the books that we publish. I price them as low as possible with a very thin profit margin. There are certain organizations that have facilitated the giveaway of a lot of books. One of the books that we published last year, we sent 1,800 copies of it to all of the bishops and vocation directors and seminaries, Catholic seminaries in the country. And we didn't charge them. We had a grant, and the grant covered the expenses. That book is called Spiritual Husbands, Spiritual Fathers. The Human Life Foundation worked on the publication of a book called Fun Is Not Enough by Francis Canavan. Dawn Eden Goldstein served as the editor of that book. And we gave away maybe 1,000 copies. These books are available at enroutebooksandmedia.com. But the idea was to disseminate as much as possible, as cheaply as possible. We have a few of the authors who did audio books, and we gave away the audio books on our website at wcatradio.com, serializing them like Charles Dickens did, so that if you didn't have the money for the book, you could go and listen to the entire book for free. And the idea was it was a marketing strategy. People who listen to the first half of the book may want to get the book and read it and keep it as a reference. So I love the idea that you just gave of the Catholic Worker, that example of a penny a copy and no advertising. As far as shoestring budgets go, I don't think you could get more shoestring than that until you hit En Route Books and Media and WCAT Radio.
All right. Mario, take us forward. There's a lot more to this story.
Yes, it's very interesting. I have a question about Holy Apostle College and Seminary, which I think I have some relationship to that institution, but that's another story. What is the role that institution do you think is playing into the Catholic world?
Holy Apostles, I call it a gift to the church. And it's on the same model. We have very inexpensive education with quality faculty members. So in 2015, we lowered our tuition 28%. And that, again, that was a promotional or marketing strategy. The idea was to keep pace with Southern New Hampshire University, which had courses at $320 a credit hour. And ours were higher, so we dropped them, $320 a credit hour, and we kept that for 4 years, for as long as we could. We've raised it a little bit since. But the idea was to provide quality education at an affordable price, because we believe that a debt-free graduate is a gift to the church. So this is our chapel behind me. This is what I'm sitting in front of in terms of my background. This chapel was built in 2010, and we completely paid it off just recently, this past year. And we were able to do it because of the business model. You know, when I entered Holy Apostles in 2011 as the interim director of distance learning, I entered an online program that had 2 MAs, an MA in philosophy and an MA in theology. And I just completed them. You know, it's like those commercials where you've got the guy who says, I liked it so much, I bought the program. You know, I bought the business. So we had hit $150,000 in 2011. That was what those tuition revenues and everything gave us after all the dust had cleared. This year we're going to break $3.5 million. That's in 10 years. That's how we've grown. We've added undergraduate programs. We added a Master of Arts in Pastoral Studies. That's a ministerial program. We're getting ready to launch a 100% online, fully accredited by the Association of Theological Schools and the New England Commission of Higher Education, a Master of Divinity program for laity. It's 72 credits, and it's going to provide a ministerial degree in the same way that other schools that offer MDivs provide, except ours is 100% online. It's the only one like it in the country. There's another school, St. Joseph's in Maine, that has an online MDiv, but they're not accredited by the Association of Theological Schools. They're not one of the 40 major seminaries in the country. So I think the dynamic of that kind of a program is going to be very attractive to people. So in short, Holy Apostles, by engaging in a very orthodox magisterial Catholicism, is attractive to a lot of people who want to learn their faith and learn how to live that faith. So I think that's what we offer.
Christopher, you've had some connections with this institution, as I recall. In fact, I've heard you intone a certain melody that has a line that goes, "Rootity-toot, rootity-toot, we are the lads from the Institute." I wonder if you'd like to continue to explore with Sebastian, Holy Apostles College and Seminary.
Well, I'm not sure what to expect. I think Mario has Holy Apostles in common.
Well, Chris, you were one of my students once.
I was, yes.
You can't deny it. Mr. Zehnder, you can't deny it.
Well, I wouldn't want to place the blame on him too.
What about that incomplete that he still has, Sebastian? Are you going to ever get that out of him?
Oh, I think I remember Chris as one of the brightest students we had. So thank you, Chris, for demonstrating a lived faith by moving from your program of study post-graduation into this wonderful online ministry you've got called WCAT's Radio's The Open Door.
And I've been able to make a living off it. No.
Well, that's part of my business model too. Cheap labor.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, my actual business.
We're hard scrabble. We're a hard scrabble group.
Right. Well, it's cheap to live in Ohio. Maybe we have, you and I have in common, Sebastian, which even Mario doesn't have in common.
Whoa.
Is the fact that we're lay Dominicans, and I think you're professed, and I'm only in temporary promises, but maybe you can tell us something about the vocation of a lay Dominican, especially in relation to what you do, and what led you to become a lay Dominican, and what the thing actually is for people who might not know.
Oh, sure, yeah. Well, when I landed in St. Louis, again, I lost a bet. So this is God's sense of humor and His providence. The first full-time job I was able to find was at Kendrick Glennon Seminary as an educational technologist and an instructional designer of sorts. But what I mostly did was I worked with faculty to teach them how to use appropriate technologies within their on-campus teaching and learning environments. That's the line. So within a few years, I trained all the faculty and all the students on smart classrooms, on the use of presentation software, on changing the educational model from one that was rote lecture, where the professor would just lecture to the students and the students would write down what it is that they heard, come from the pulpit, as it were, or the dais in the class.
Who would want to change that model? Who in the world would want to tinker with that?
It's got its promises. It's got its advantages. You get to learn or absorb the wisdom of somebody who's been studying a particular topic for a long time. But it disadvantages, you don't get to interact with it very well. And you get up from class, you go to the library, you write a paper, you submit the paper, the professor marks the paper, and that's the extent of your interaction. In a lecture discussion format, even a good discussion will have the voices of about at least half a dozen students, who plug and play, over the course of the learning experience. So take, for instance, a professor who knows he's got to get through a certain amount of material, what my good friend Jim Rafferty calls anapostrophobia, or the fear of not covering all of the content. That professor, if he's going to ask a question, is going to receive responses from 3 or 4 students, and that'll be a good discussion. But 25 students in the classroom, 21 of them didn't say a word. 21 of them didn't engage verbally with the back and forth with the professor. And it doesn't matter what the students say. The professor is going to move to the next slide on his PowerPoint. And, it's like that story that Plato tells of the Phaedrus, where he has Socrates say, look, you can stubbornly argue with a text all day long, and it's not going to change what it's saying. If you want something transformative, engage in dialogue with the person who is in the city. Don't go out to the country to read what the person wrote, because you can't talk to the text. So within a few years of that, the Kendrick Glennon Seminary's teaching and learning community was geared for the 21st century. And then in 2006, a friend of mine, Bernie Stratman, said, what do you think about, and he was the head of the National Catholic Educational Association Seminary Department at the time, and I had started writing for his journal, the Seminary Journal. He said, what do you think about putting together a structure that would network all of the seminaries together so that somebody could offer a class in California that somebody in St. Louis could take and receive transfer credit for? And I said, so something like a Catholic distance learning network. And he said, yeah. So I pitched the idea to the Wabash Center out in Indianapolis, actually Crawfordsville, Indiana, and they funded it. They gave me $70,000 to train what at the time the proposal was 30 faculty members in Catholic seminaries around the country. By the time the grant money ran out, we had trained 87 faculty members in 25 seminaries on how to offer at least one online course. And we actually had it working. We had students register out of Kendrick Glennon Seminary for a science and theology class out of the Seminary of the Immaculate Conception. We had students from any number of seminaries allowing their students to register as their electives for courses that were taught in other places. And it was all done through the principle of reciprocity and through transfer credit. So that was how I got started at Kendrick and how I got started in this greater world. So the question then of the lay Dominican is embedded in that. It's embedded in what we'll be talking a little bit later about sharing the fruits of my contemplation. In 2008, I sat down to listen to some CDs that I had received from the Rosary Center in Oregon. And one of them was by a man named Father Brian Milady, a lay Dominican of the Western, not a lay Dominican, he was a Dominican father of the Western province. And the CD was called Study as an Act of Prayer. And in one short hour of listening to the Dominican understanding that when we exercise our rational intellect, we are exercising the very thing, the specific difference between us and the lower animals, the very thing that enables eternal and joyful communion with our Creator. So study is an act of prayer. So as soon as that was over, I got up from my desk and I walked down the hall to Father Tom McDermott's office. Father Tom McDermott is a Dominican father of the Central Province. And I said, Father, I understand that it's possible to become a lay Dominican. Do you know anything about that? And he directed me to Michael Porterfield, who was the moderator of the lay Dominicans in St. Louis, to our chapter here. And I went to one meeting and was hooked. I was received in 2008 in that fall term, and I took my temporary profession a year later. And then 3 years after that, which is the period in which Christopher's in right now, 3 years after that, I was fully professed. And I learned that the difficulty of being fully professed in a small lay Dominican chapter is that you eventually end up in a leadership role rather quickly, sometimes. So my entire temporary profession, I was the vice moderator. And I kept saying, but there's no vice to moderate here. When are we going to get some of that good stuff? And the next 6 years I spent as the moderator of the group. So I retired from my group moderation in January of 19, and the group had grown considerably in those years from the time I had entered. And we had a new leadership team that was ready to go. And they are just incredible. Ken and Flora Wilsker are now part of the chapter council, and Ken is the moderator and Flora is the treasurer. And I don't think we've ever had more donations or money in our treasury, or people considering a life of the lay Dominicans in our chapter since the two of them came on board. So I am just incredibly astounded by God's grace in the way the life of a lay Dominican has allowed me to grow spiritually, and the way that growth has played out in the life of our community in St. Louis.
Christopher, do you have some follow-ups on that?
Yeah, my wife and I are, like I said, we're our first profession, our three-year trial period, I guess. And we were attracted to it. Primarily, actually, we were first attracted to being Benedictine oblates, but we could never find a monastery to make the oblation. And we moved to Columbus here, and that's Columbus, Ohio, where we have St. Patrick's, which is one of the premier Dominican parishes in the Eastern Province, and they had a lay Dominican group, so we joined. I think one thing that's interesting that people don't understand is that lay Dominicans are not just like a Dominican club. It's attached to the priests of the order, who are actually members of the order. We're actually full-fledged members of the order. We take promises but not vows, but you have to go through the even Holy See in order to be removed from your promises. So it's actually a very, very serious commitment, and it's actually becoming basically a member of a religious order.
Well, as lay Dominicans, we're in the world, but we're not necessarily of the world. We are people who work in regular jobs, who engage in regular relationships. We're married, we have children. But we embrace that understanding of co-responsibility with the clergy. And as you said, it's not like we're paraprofessionals in a professional world. We're full members of the Dominican community. And it's good to engage in anything we do in the fullness of what we're doing. So I'm delighted, Christopher, that you are on this path and that you are on your way to a full profession and to a lifelong commitment.
Mario, I wonder, this is a spur of the moment thought, but I wonder if you'd like to do a compare and contrast communion and liberation and the lay Dominican.
Oh, you're muted, Mario.
Sorry, my dog is. It's a good question. I'm not an expert in canon law to make a distinction in terms of belonging to a particular charism. But what I can see from my Thomist or Thomistic background, if that is close to what Dominican charism is, anyone who is a member, canonically speaking, of community liberation can be also a member of a Dominican order as a lay person. In other words, the charism of community liberation is such that you encounter Christ as an experience. Through that, you go through a different way of educating yourself or educating by God's grace in a very particular community, so that you go through different stages, if you will, at your own pace. There's no structured way of that way toward we call perfection. In other words, community liberation is very free in that way. So you mature as your own commitment to that charism is through the identification of Father Giussani charism to the church. Now, within this, I think, very large commitment, you can have your own vocation as an intellectual. And that vocation you can exercise whether you belong to an Augustinian third order or Franciscan or Dominican. That is possible. I know some people who have this quote unquote dual commitment, not many. And others just are intellectual within GL. But most of the people in community liberation are not intellectual in that sense as any other group. So that is my closest, in my own experience, I said, well, I was, before being a member of a GL, a Thomist, whose Thomism that I inherited was very intellectual, very abstract, very moralistic in many ways. That's a long story that you can trace back to the whole battles in 1960s, 1950, particularly in Latin America. So when I encounter GL, that was a different type of the Christian fact. Christ become a presence. We didn't study the word only, but God's presence through the experience that we were encountering there. So that is basically, I think, the distinction I can make. But again, is there anything that is far away from community liberation? It's just a formula. It's very free. So much so that it's very different from other lay institutions. I don't know what Sebastian has to say about that.
You're talking the differences between a religious order that's third order and other lay institutions?
My point.
I mean, we can pull canonically out of it.
Right. What I'm saying is that if you ask me whether I would, as a member of Community Liberation, allowed to belong to a third order, my quick answer is yes. Are there many people who do that? I would say no. That's my point. In other words, there's no way by which you cannot do certain things. In other words, you can be a Dominican, profess Dominican priest, and yet belong to Community Liberation. That's happened. And there are people. That's my point. So you ask me, do I have some attraction to lay Dominican vocation? I say, well, yes and no. I don't know what that means because I didn't encounter that provocation yet. So, but I'm a Thomas. And if you go back and try to compare this to what the founder of Community Liberation said, well, it's very, very rich. His tradition is Augustinian on one hand, it's Thomas on the other. And so it's, I think it's a unique way of experiencing Christ.
Well, it is. And I would venture to say that you have all the makings of a good lay Dominican. And here's why. I'll jump into our mottos. We have 3 mottos. I mean, we got lots of mottos. I was once at a lay Dominican provincial meeting. I was a delegate from our chapter. And somebody at the meeting said, you know, St. Francis once said we should pray without ceasing and when necessary use words. And this delegate sitting next to me started rapping his hand on the table like this and said, you know, I hate it when people say that all the time. We are Dominicans. We must use words. We must. And, you know, he was so animated. And so, and then he turned to me for validation. And I looked at him and I said, well, you know, without missing a beat, that goes without saying. So Veritas is our first motto. That's truth. And we understand truth is a person, Jesus Christ. So you get that because as a Thomist, that's what you pursue. Laudere, benedicere, predicare. To praise, to bless, and to preach. That love of life, that engagement with others, and that sharing of your thoughts with others, which I've seen you do, Mario, is all bound up in that. And when I say love of life that God gave you, you know, and the love of God and the giver of life, and the love of the Holy Spirit, and all of that. But the third one is, I think, where we've got you. And the fullness of the third one is contemplare et contemplata aliis tradere, to contemplate and to hand on to others the fruits of that contemplation. And I see you do that a lot, Mario, not only in this show, but in the other things that you produce for your students and for your community. To be able to think, to exercise that rational faculty that separates you from the lower animals, you know, all of us who are humans, our human rational faculty, to have a willingness to share your thoughts with others is a great first step. Now, in terms of what kind of thoughts we should contemplate, certainly there's the Liturgy of the Hours, there's the Breviary, we pray daily, there's the Rosary that brings us to an understanding of the life of Christ and the importance of Mary and all of that stuff. But I think that that Scripture, that St. Paul provided something very solid that we can latch onto in Philippians 4:8. He says, finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is gracious, if there is any excellence, and if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. And if you put your mind on those things, you're going to share those things with others just naturally, because as humans, we're not only rational creatures, but we're communicative creatures. We're relational creatures. We were created in relationship for relationship, which is why in Luke 10:27, Christ affirms that we should love God with all our mind, heart, soul, and strength, and love our neighbor as ourselves. And then later, the Apostle John in 1 John 4:20 says, he who says he loves God but not his neighbor is a liar. We love our Creator through the image and likeness that He's provided in His creation, in us, in other humans. And you, Mario, embrace all of these things. So we are happy to welcome you into the lay Dominicans. You're a central province out in Kansas City. There is a chapter there. And we look forward to seeing you at the next meeting.
Well, I'm just happy to report that the lay missionaries of charity don't allow for that sort of dual allegiance. In the lay missionaries of charity, you are supposed to focus on the lay missionaries of charity and not have other commitments, for better or for worse. If you're a lay missionary of charity, for one thing, you're supposed to be too poor to be attending meetings all over the place. Now, I want to introduce one contentious note before we end, but it's contentious and constructive at the same time. I know Mario is deeply committed to personalism, and I know that Catholic social thought today is incorporating personalist themes that are really enriching the perennial philosophy of Aristotle and Thomas. And of course, we know that St. John Paul II emphasized the personalist dimension that Thomism should open itself to. And one central consideration with personalism is presence. Now, in looking at the splendid work of Holy Apostles College and Seminary, we see a kind of presence, but it's technologized. And I was kidding you about East Texas as being a two-edged sword. Let me, on that same note, kid you about and poke about a bit and push back a bit. To what extent does the world of the web work against presence, work against the personalist theme? We have this tension between those who say, live and preach only when necessary. And yet what we have when we look at the Gospel of John was, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was made flesh, a coming together of the two. So I don't know, let me pose this in a different way. You're invited out to lunch by a fellow named C.S. Lewis, who personally is present to his students. And he says, what's this thing I hear about the web? You say to him, well, Clive Staples, this is what I say to you about the web. What do you say?
Well, the first thing is just to draw back to what I mentioned earlier. We are still in a global pandemic, and I think the importance of personal presence has never been more emphasized in a time where we're required to social distance. We're not allowed to gather in large groups. We weren't able to go to Mass for the longest time. The churches were closed. All of these things drove us into community with one another in whatever means. And Zoom, which is our platform now, is one of those. The fact that so many people gathered with one another through appropriate media or mediated communication, methods of mediated communication, is an indication of the love and desire we have for community and for replicating in whatever way we can personal presence. Before the pandemic, if we gathered together in meetings, they were largely audio telephone meetings where we didn't see other people. But we can see each other now. This different because these kinds of meetings are real, and these kinds of groups are real because there's real people engaging them, but they're site-specific, they're task-oriented. And that's different from living in community with people with whom you have chance encounters or whom you can observe in their behavior and in their discussions. In activities that are not necessarily focused on a particular task for the reason why the community gathered at a particular time. So I would say to C.S. Lewis, I would say humans, as he well knows, are social creatures. And we're going to come together in any way. If you recall Marshall McLuhan, the great media enthusiast of the 20th century.
And Chesterton fan.
Which is an important mark in his favor. He said that our technologies are extensions of ourselves. So we have 5 senses, and we extend those senses in multiple directions through the technologies that we use. But he had an important caveat that I think is worth addressing in the context of your question. He said that all artificial amplifications of the human person necessarily bring about corresponding natural amputations. And he gives some examples. He said we wear glasses, and eventually we can't not wear the glasses. We drive in cars, and eventually we lose our capacity to walk long distances. So any technology that advances us, that amplifies our capacity to engage in anything, there are natural amputations. And so if we can figure out what those natural amputations are for any given purpose. I mean, right now, Mario is in Kansas City, in the heart of the heartland. I think in the geographic center of the planet, actually, Mario, if you look at a globe. Spin it and put your finger on it. Jim is out there in California, and Christopher's in Ohio, and I'm sitting here in St. Louis. There's the only way we could come together for this conversation is in this way. I mean, we could have been on the phone and not seen each other, but I mean, this is the best thing to not to our coming together in physical time and space, and going out to a restaurant or going out to have lunch. Sometimes I travel. I traveled a lot before the pandemic. I'd have dinner with my wife through Skype. You know, we'd call each other, we'd sit and we'd talk, and we'd both be eating. So there's an old saying, if you can't be with the one you love the one you're with. Well, now you can be with the one you love in many different ways. And one of them is through these kinds of technologies.
Thank you. Important insights. We end with the word. Today we have a very short gospel, and I'm intrigued that it involves an argument. One of the things that we often discuss on the Open Door is the role of arguments. This is from the shortest gospel, Mark. As Jesus was teaching in the temple area, he said, "How do the scribes claim that Christ is the son of David? David himself, inspired by the Holy Spirit, said, "The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I place your enemies under your feet." Sit at my right hand until I place your enemies under my feet. Well, interjection as I turn the page. What are we to make of that? David himself calls him Lord. So how is he his son? The great crowd heard this with delight. So words, argument, economy. Thank you very much. We appreciate your coming from the sides of the stage to the center of the stage.
Oh, I appreciate your having a center stage for me to come to. So, in closing, you would ask me what if I were to fast forward to the year 2026, what would I be?
Yes.
I figure I just need to give a plug real quick for a setting or a group that has inspired me a great deal in the time we've known each other. My short answer is I think everybody should have a 5-year plan to work toward. Mine is politics. Aristotle explains near the end of the Nicomachean Ethics that politics is a nobler science than ethics because it deals not just with the individual but with the whole community. So I was looking for a political party based in the tradition of, say, Christian democracy that embraced the sanctity of life, social justice, community-oriented society, centrality of the family, economic security, care for the environment, and peace and international solidarity. And if there's not a party like that, it would have to be invented. That would be my kind of party.
And hot damn, it's been invented. You're talking about the American Solidarity Party. And by way of easy and natural transition, I want to mention that our national convention is coming at the end of June, and Yours Unruly has been invited to speak.
I know that somebody who's running for governor of California.
Well, it's more of a crawl. More of a crawl.
Yeah.
Take care, gentlemen. Take care.
Right.
God bless.
Take care.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
See ya.
The mission of Holy Apostles College and Seminary is to form faithful witnesses of Christ. Year after year, the prestigious Newman Guide has recommended Holy Apostles for our academic excellence and steadfast fidelity to the magisterial teachings of the Catholic Church. We are also fully accredited and the leader in Catholic online learning. Our students enjoy the unsurpassed flexibility to study on their own time and anywhere in the world through asynchronous engagement. Holy Apostles is dedicated to the relentless pursuit of truth, which allows students in all academic programs, including undergraduate, graduate, and personal interest, to formulate a coherent worldview based on both faith and reason. The study of the liberal arts also develops and refines key competencies associated with career readiness, such as critical thinking and problem solving, clear communication, collaboration, and a strong work ethic. The tuition rate at Holy Apostles is one of the most affordable in the country. Yearly tuition for a full-time undergraduate is under $12,000. Students at Holy Apostles can graduate with minimal or even no college debt, which enables them to live out their calling as faithful witnesses of Christ without heavy financial burdens holding them back. Please visit www.holyapostles.edu/admissions for more information. The fall 2021 admissions deadline is Friday, July 23rd. Classes start Monday, August 30th. See you soon.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
Thank you for listening to a production of WCAT Radio. Please join us in our mission of evangelization. And don't forget, love lifts up when knowledge takes flight.